Over the decades, horror has so often done a fantastic job of establishing early on who's playing what role. There's the nerd, the jock, the princess, the basket case, wait, that's The Breakfast Club. Hey, John Hughes fans. But you get the point. In fact, The Breakfast Club is a great example, not a horror example of course, but it's a great example of some of what we're getting at with this video, in that it introduces you to very pigeonholed stereotype characters only to gradually reveal more sides to these characters to step away from those stereotypes. Horror being horror, it's got a habit of doing this to the extreme, having you root for a character, a kind-hearted soul, a friendly face, an all-round good egg, only to pull the rug out from under you, making you realise, yeah, you've been pulling for totally the wrong person. So with that in mind, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are the horror movies that made you root for the wrong person. Jigsaw. The 8th Saw movie, Jigsaw finds Anna and 4 others unwillingly playing Jigsaw's latest game, and as per, each participant is somebody Jigsaw believes is wasting their life, including a purse snatcher, a junkie, and a con man. Granted, Anna is no angel, but she seems far from irredeemable, helping the other participants, reprimanding them when they act like pricks, and comforting those who need it. You even think, given Anna's maternal nature, maybe, just maybe, Jigsaw selected her by mistake. But no, she is absolutely worthy of her spot here. As in the finale, Jigsaw reveals that Anna used to be his neighbor, and when Anna's baby kept crying, she suffocated it to death, framed her husband for that murder, and then her husband, he took his own life after being falsely blamed for something so horrific. Still, despite this, Jigsaw lets Anna and another participant, Ryan, take part in one final game, allowing them to walk free if they can simply stick to the rules. However, because Anna is so desperate to be the only winner, she ruins it for both of them. So, from being set up as the best of a bad bunch, Anna actually ended up being the worst of the entire lot. Companion. In Drew Hancock's dark comedy horror, Iris heads to a retreat with her boyfriend Josh, anxious about meeting his friends for the very first time. When Iris fatally stabs one of their friends, Sergei, Josh shuts her down, revealing that she's a robot. Believing a glitch caused her to use lethal force against Sergei, Iris runs away, knowing that Josh will erase her memory if he catches her. Even though Josh behaves coldly towards Iris at times, you understand where he's coming from, since he obviously doesn't want her to go, full Terminator, full Skynet. But we eventually realize that Josh actually programmed Iris to kill Sergei, all so that he and his pals could pocket a cool $12 million from his safe. Josh seemed like a sweetheart of a guy when we first met Iris, but even that is later revealed to be a memory that he programmed into Iris's databank. He and his friends though, total a-holes. Though it does even get to a point where Josh's friends decide that, you're just too much of a dirtbag, man. Orphan First Kill. By now, you're likely well aware of Orphan's all-timer of a twist, that rather than a 9-year-old Russian girl called Esther, our titular Orphan is in fact a 33-year-old Estonian woman, Lena Klammer, who's a serial killer that suffers from a pituitary disorder that makes her look deceptively young. Lena may have been killed in Orphan's finale, but what's that? Why, it's a prequel released 13 years after the original. So in Orphan First Kill, we find the 31-year-old Lena escaping from a psychiatric institute and taking on the identity of a missing American girl called Esther Albright. And after meeting with Esther's distraught mother Tricia, Lena's plan, it has worked an absolute treat. Now, you obviously feel awful for Tricia here. Not only has she had to go through the trauma of missing her daughter, but the audience, we all know that this reunion, it is all a ruse, that Tricia's emotions and grief are being taken advantage of as Lena poses as Esther. However, don't be feeling too sorry for Tricia, as halfway through First Kill, Tricia admits that, she totally knows that Lena isn't who she says she is. And why does she know that? Well, because the real Esther was killed 4 years earlier by her older brother Gunnar. So, to avoid any scandal, Tricia covered up that death, buried her daughter's body, and pretended that she'd gone missing. And the only reason she allowed Lena to pose as Esther was so that her husband Alan, it was for his own sanity, with Alan not being aware of what really happened to Esther. Because we already know that Lena is a total psychopath, you instinctively root for anyone she's at odds with, like Tricia. But nope, it's eventually revealed that Tricia is just as heartless. Hide and Seek. Hide and Seek follows David Calloway, a grieving psychologist who moves to a new home with his daughter Emily after the suicide of his wife, that would be Allison. David believes Emily is struggling with her mother's passing, as she performs disturbing acts around the house, then blames it all on her imaginary friend Charlie. An imaginary friend that David starts to think might actually be real. You're naturally on David's side here. He's recently been widowed, is doing the best he can, has a grieving daughter to deal with, as well as his own grief and emotions, and all as he's moved to a new area. But wouldn't you know it, that sympathy for David, it is thrown out of the window when we learn that he and Charlie are one and the same. A flashback showing that David saw Allison kissing another man at a New Year's Eve party. Too timid to confront his wife, David unconsciously created the volatile alter ego of Charlie, who promptly murdered Allison and framed her death as suicide. I mean, David isn't fully to blame, I guess, as he's not really in control of his actions. But yeah, there's still several murders here, including a cat no less, so screw that guy. Censor. Video nasties have generated such controversy over the decades, so a horror film on that very subject was always gonna be inevitable. Which brings us nicely to Censor. This 2021 psychological horror focuses on Enid, a censor review journalist who despises violence. And while reviewing a slasher feature, Enid notices that the lead actress, Alice, has an uncanny resemblance to her sister, the sister who disappeared as a child. As Enid begins to investigate, she finds her whole world turning upside down. And though Enid is clearly unstable, you can't be too harsh on her, as she's clearly been traumatized for years by her sister's disappearance. And even when Enid kills one of the film's producers, you still don't blame Enid, as the guy forced himself on her, and she killed him by accident. However, Censor's finale sees Enid totally lose her grip on reality, marching onto the set of Alice's new movie, killing an actor and the director, then kidnapping Alice, even after it's made completely clear that Alice, no, she is not Enid's sister. On top of that, it's also implied that Enid actually murdered her sister years ago, indicating that our hero has been unhinged all the way since childhood. Hollow Man. You know, when thinking about Hollow Man all these years later, it's easy to think that Kevin Bacon's Sebastian Cain is a complete lunatic from the off. But when you go back and rewatch this 2000 movie from Paul Verhoeven, you kind of forget how Crane isn't nuts from the get-go. He is a charming, brilliant scientist, perfecting a formula that turns animals invisible, and when a human test subject is needed, it's Crane who's eager to volunteer himself. Of course, things don't go quite to plan, and Sebastian Crane's fellow scientists aren't able to turn him back visible, and as a result he becomes more and more mentally unstable. For the first 45 minutes or so of Hollow Man, Sebastian comes across as a good dude, a noble fella, playful, passionate, and caring towards his colleagues, and also towards those test subject animals. And rather than pressurizing anyone else to be the human guinea pig, he's fine with taking on that responsibility himself. And even when Sebastian initially starts lashing out, you do feel a little bit bad for him, as he'll likely never see his face in the mirror again, plus he'll probably be forced to live in a lab forever. But hey, after we witness him slaughter animals, again, never cool, man. Force himself on women, also not cool. Carry out cold-blooded murder, yeah, no. Sebastian Crane, he becomes a total monster. Pet Sematary. Just because you wind up rooting for the wrong person, it doesn't always mean that that person is actually evil. Sometimes that person, they can just be a bit of an idiot. Step forward, Louis Creed of Pet Sematary fame. The 1989 adaptation of Stephen King's Pet Sematary centers around Louis, a doctor who moves his family out towards Ludlow, Maine, where the Creeds just so happen to have a mystical graveyard nearby. A mystical graveyard that resurrects things buried in it. So when the family cat Church is killed on the highway, Louis decides to give the graveyard a test run, burying the cat, only to see the poor feline come back as an erratic, violent zombie. So, not too dissimilar to regular cats, I guess. I know, my little rascal can certainly be a bit nuts at times. Anyway, despite seeing how unhinged the Pet Sematary made Church, Louis decides to bury his young son Gage there when he's later killed by a passing truck. Yes, grief is an awful thing that can make us do desperate things, and that's part of the wider message of Pet Sematary. But yeah, burying your kiddo here isn't exactly a smart move by Louis Creed. Of course, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, Gage comes back as a terrifying, sinister monster who ends up killing his mother, Rachel. Distraught, Louis is forced to give Gage a lethal injection, losing his son for a second time. Talk about paying the price, right? But the silver lining is that Louis, he has learned his lesson. Of course he has, of course. Yeah, of course, only he didn't. He then uses the graveyard to bring his wife back to life, despite all of those red flags. Come on, man, what are you doing? And wouldn't you know it, but the final scene implies that yes, Rachel is back and about to murder Louis Creed. You really do root for the man at times, but seriously, what is going on? Unfriended. Oh, Unfriended, the 2014 movie that was one of the first to really embrace chat platforms and the like. In this case, Skype chats. Remember Skype? I remember Skype. So missed, but also so very much dropping the board on letting Zoom sweep in and dominate the market. And that is a horror story all of itself, the implosion of Skype. But yes, Unfriended revolves around Blair and her friends having a Skype chat, when all of a sudden, they notice an unknown user is part of the chat. And wouldn't you know it, but this uninvited guest is supposedly the ghost of their dead classmate, Laura Barnes. You see, an embarrassing video of a wasted Laura was circulated online, leading to her sadly taking her own life. And now, the spirit of Laura is determined to get payback from the grave, and all through Skype. So, as the night progresses, it comes to light that all of Blair's friends betrayed each other in some way or another, such as Blair having stolen a car and cheated on her boyfriend, though that is nowhere near as bad as some of the stuff the others have gotten up to. In fact, Blair seems to be the only person genuinely sorry for not supporting Laura, now doing her best to make amends. Yeah, that is until the final few minutes let us know that Blair was the one who actually recorded the video of the passed out drunk Laura soiling herself back in the day. And when Blair pleads for forgiveness, Laura gleefully laughs as Blair's laptop, it slams shut. The Last Broadcast. Found footage horror The Last Broadcast centers around filmmaker David Lee, who discovers fragmented video recordings of an unsolved murder case. As the recovered footage is analysed, some suggest the murderer is a mythical entity, but David has an alternative theory. David tries to play it cool, presenting himself as a natural documentarian, but he's hugely passionate about this particular case, and he's super keen to get to the bottom of things before anybody else does. Through his research, David deduces that Sword, an unstable psychic, is the killer. All of the evidence backing up David's theory, with Sword found guilty and dying in prison shortly after. However, when data retrieval expert Shelley reconstructs images from a tape of the murder victim, she discovers that, wouldn't you know it, David is the killer. You see, all of the footage up until this point had been shot by David, then edited in a way so that he'd never be considered a suspect. From there, David kills Shelley, continues narrating his documentary, all as the authorities, they are none the wiser. The Faculty. Pulling plenty of inspiration from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Robert Rodriguez's The Faculty revolves around a group of high schoolers who discover that their teachers are being mind-controlled by alien parasites. Each of the group have their fair share of flaws, but you kinda like them in their own different ways. And the sweetest of the bunch is Mary Beth, a new transfer student who seems to be genuinely nice, a genuinely caring, lovely person. And when drug-dealing rascal Zeke discovers that the aliens rely on water, he gets his friends to snort his drug in order to prove they're not an alien. That drug, it is actually dry powdered caffeine, which nicely dehydrates someone, kinda the polar opposite of what those aliens would be after. So, all of Zeke's schoolmates take the drug, including Mary Beth, and all of them are absolutely fine, except for Delilah, whose face starts to wriggle with the alien parasite. She then flips out, trashes Zeke's homemade lab, and then just decides to run through a wall as she makes her escape. And in turn, that makes it all the more shocking when it's Mary Beth who's later revealed to be the alien queen, leading a hostile takeover of Earth and enslaving humanity as she goes about it. Christine, a John Carpenter movie adapted from a Stephen King story. Christine has poor Arnie as a bullied teenager, buying a 1958 Plymouth Fury in the hope of looking kinda cool. Little does he know, that car, which is named Christine, is alive and can warp the mind of its owner. In this case, that will be Arnie now. But good for Arnie, as he's now getting some welcome attention, especially from the popular girls at his school. And you hope it all works out for the fella, as he's the sort of person who wouldn't hurt a fly, not at all. The thing is, Arnie's bullies, they get jealous, destroying Christine, which causes Arnie to spiral into a rage, promising to punish everyone who ever made his life a living hell. I mean, you do want those bullies to get their comeuppance, that's only fair. But yeah, Arnie goes a smidge too far, running him down in Christine, grinding them to paste, all as Christine continues to make Arnie more and more unhinged, to the point he even starts running down his pals who'd stuck with him through thick and thin. Arnie may have been manipulated, but it gets to a point where you can't really defend the guy anymore. Sorry, dude. Werewolves Within. Based on the video game of the same name, horror comedy Werewolves Within has Forest Ranger Finn and mail carrier Cecily doing the darndest to survive after the lodge they're residing in is besieged by werewolves. Despite fortifying the lodge, our group finds itself being attacked, proving that at least one of them is a werewolf. Paranoia skyrockets, people wind up dead, and we get to just Finn and Cecily as our final two survivors. Due to Cecily's adorable demeanor and her blossoming bond with Finn, you're happy to see the two make it out alive, only for it to then feel like a total betrayal when Finn figures out that Cecily, she was the werewolf all along. In the closing moments, Finn realizes Cecily had strategically stirred bad blood between the citizens, influencing them to kill one another, or just simply making it easier for her to pick them all off. Though Finn immediately dispatches of Cecily, it's still a bittersweet ending, bringing an abrupt end to any budding romance. Upgrade. With the Saw and Insidious franchises to his name, not to mention The Invisible Man and The Wolfman, Upgrade is one of Lee Winnell's movies like Cooties and Dead Silence a little bit, that maybe doesn't quite get the attention it deserves. This 2018 cyberpunk horror, which is actually set in 2046, centers around Gray, an auto mechanic whose wife is killed after their self-driving car crashes, where a group of assassins murder Gray's wife and shoot him in the neck, leaving him paralyzed. After Gray unsuccessfully tries to take his own life, he's approached by eccentric scientist Eron, offering him an AI implant called STEM, which allows Gray to walk again. STEM also starts to communicate with Gray, offering to help him hunt down the people who'd ruined his life. And so, STEM hijacks Gray's body, making him a total badass on a roaring rampage of revenge. However, in a twist, the first twist at least, it's revealed that the assassins hired to kill Gray's wife and put him in a wheelchair, that was all put in place by Eron, who intended to use Gray as a guinea pig for STEM. In a further twist though, Gray breaks into Eron's lab, discovering that it wasn't Eron pulling the strings, but it was actually STEM. Yes, STEM masterminded all of this, hoping to eliminate Eron and shut down all safety protocols so that it could possess a human body. So, despite supposedly having Gray's best interests at heart, STEM was looking out for itself all along. Triangle. A proper head trip of a movie, Triangle opens with Jess getting her autistic son Tommy ready for a yacht trip with their friends. But when Tommy can't attend due to being at school, Jess just decides to go on the trip anyway. Why not? When that yacht capsizes, Jess and her group find shelter on an ocean liner. Though things go from bad to worse when they realize the empty liner is actually home to a burlap sack wearing killer. Think Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 2. And to top it all off, the group is stuck in some sort of time loop. Now, Jess is an extremely sympathetic figure, a single mother who has an understandably demanding son, but when she initially arrives on the yacht, she's noticeably disorientated. And even when she kills that masked killer, the time loop, it resets, and we're right back in that particular pickle, where Jess thinks that the only way she can escape is by murdering her friends. I'm not sure on the logic on that one. And so, Jess puts the burlap sack on herself, revealing that she was the killer in the original timeline. When Jess finally does make it home, she realizes she's returned shortly before she left for her trip, and looking through the window of her house, she sees past Jess abusing Tommy, leading current Jess, or future Jess, to kill past Jess, replacing her. Then, when Tommy dies moments later in a car crash, Jess believes she has nothing left to live for, heads towards the yacht, kicking off the original timeline. Yeah, Triangle Man, it's quite the trip, shall we say. The Others. On face value, The Others is a classic, glorious ghost story, as Grace and her photosensitive children wait for her husband to return from the Second World War. But when a supernatural force starts tearing down the house's curtains, Grace becomes terrified that the sunlight will actually kill her children. The Others follows a familiar haunted house formula to an absolute T. Well, until its final moments, when there's the jaw-dropping reveal that Grace and her kiddos, they are the ghosts who've been unknowingly haunting that property. Not just that, but this reveal is accompanied by the revelation that Grace lost her mind years ago, killing her children and then taking her own life, with the three then reborn as spirits. Saint Maud. In Rose Glass's Saint Maud, Morvith Clark's Katie is a nurse, now going by the name Maud. Disillusioned after the accidental death of a patient, and now tasked with caring for a terminally ill atheist, that will be Amanda. After suffering religious visions, Maud believes she'll be redeemed if she converts Amanda. But due to Maud's fragile mind, we're not really sure whether her visions are authentic or if she's having a psychotic breakdown. So, when Amanda takes on a demonic form in the final act, Maud's faith is validated, proving God has been testing her all along. After stabbing a demon to death with some scissors, Maud heads to the beach and prepares to ascend to heaven, all as she sets herself on fire. Shockingly, rather than burning to death, Maud spouts angelic wings, as all around her bow down in awe, Maud smiling after doing God proud. But nah, no chance. The final seconds show Maud screaming in agony as the flames incinerate her, the penny dropping to confirm that Maud, or Katie, was indeed suffering from hallucinations this entire time. And yes, she just murdered an innocent, terminally ill woman rather than any sort of demon. The Tall Man. Few horror movies flip-flop expectations quite like The Tall Man, a film that follows Julia, a caring mother, and her son David, in a rundown town where kids have regularly gone missing, inspiring the urban legend of the child-snatching Tall Man. Julia blows this off, not believing the Tall Man myth whatsoever, until it's David who is kidnapped, with the abductor revealed to be David's real mother, and that reveals that Julia, she is the Tall Man. After being arrested, Julia admits that she's killed many local children, believing death was better than allowing them to live in abusive families. However, in a total swerve, the film's epilogue explains how Julia is part of a secret organization, taking children from abusive homes, faking their deaths, then moving these kiddos into caring family homes. Knowing that those children would be returned to their unloving homes if the organization was ever exposed, Julia instead stays quiet, taking the ultimate bullet, the ultimate take one for the team, preferring to be locked up for the deaths of countless children than revealing all about this organization. The Tall Man. Quite the emotional rollercoaster, as you initially root for Julia, then feel bad for having rooted for a child killer, then feel bad again when you realise you rooted against the woman who wasn't killing kids, but was actually saving them, giving them a better life. Frailty, the directorial debut of the late great Bill Paxton. Frailty begins with Fenton Mix tracking down FBI agent Doyle, recounting how his religious father, simply known as Dad Mix, believed he was commanded by God to destroy demons disguised as humans. So far, so very much sounding like the plot of an old Buffy episode. Dad Mix seeks the help of Fenton and his brother Adam in this crusade, but when Fenton suggests, maybe the old man has got a few issues, a few sandwiches short of a picnic, Dad Mix then accuses Fenton of being the spawn of Satan, encouraging him to kill a supposed demon, that'd be Brad, in order to prove that Fenton is not the son of the devil. Instead, Fenton kills his dad, seemingly putting an end to this whole murderous cycle. In a huge twist though, it turns out that Fenton, or the Fenton we've been watching all along at least, is not Fenton, but is in fact Adam, the brother, and that Adam had killed the real Fenton after the real Fenton became the deranged God's Hand serial killer. But still, not only have we been following what we thought was Fenton, but it's revealed that Adam has the same abilities as his father, the same visions, and he's carrying out the same work of hunting demons, killing Agent Doyle after it's revealed that he was involved in the murder of Adam's mother, with Doyle's death then framed onto the now dead Fenton. And if you can keep up with that, good luck to you. A Perfect Getaway. In A Perfect Getaway, newlyweds Cliff and Sydney are on their honeymoon in Hawaii, where they encounter a mysterious couple, Nick and Gina. When Cliff and Sydney hear reports of a pair of serial killers in the area, they become noticeably cautious over their newfound friends. However, Cliff and Sydney aren't wary because they believe Nick and Gina are the killers. No, they're wary that Nick and Gina will expose Cliff and Sydney as the killers. On paper, it should have been easy to see through this whole charade, but still, A Perfect Getaway is careful with what it shows, and more importantly, what it doesn't show you. For example, this 2009 picture starts with a wedding video of the real Cliff and Sydney, though Cliff and Sydney are never shown during this clip, meaning you naturally assume that the lead characters played by Steve Zahn and Mia Jovovich are those same characters, and when these killers are covered on the local news, the camera never reveals their faces, so naturally we assume Nick and Gina are the more likely culprits. Even though the truth is staring right at us, it's only fully evident on a rewatch of A Perfect Getaway. Strange Darling. Strange Darling is told in a non-linear way, dumping viewers straight into Chapter 3 of a 6-chapter story. As a result, a lot of info is thrown at you straight away, forcing you to try and piece all this together. The first thing we see is Alice, a bloodied woman missing her ear, running in terror from a mysterious gunman called the Demon. There are split-second flashbacks of the Demon intensely choking Alice, indicating he's tried to strangle her to death earlier on, before the story abruptly jumps to Chapter 5, where Alice is hiding in an elderly couple's house. And the elderly couple, they have both been killed. Not all the facts are established yet, of course, but the signs, they place Alice as the final girl, and the Demon as the big bad villain. After all, his name is, the guy's name is literally the Demon. Slowly but surely, it's apparent that the narrative was designed to hoodwink the audience, because as it turns out, Alice is the serial killer, and she intended the Demon to be her latest victim. And that flashback choking sequence, why, that was simply some bedroom roleplay that Alice actually initiated. And on top of that, she was the one who slaughtered that elderly couple. Although most twists seem glaring in hindsight, nobody had any reason to second guess the status of the two lead characters in Strange Darling, making that reveal all the more hard-hitting.